Hello and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. Coming up on our program, California billionaire environmentalist Tom Steyer has a new gamble in the politics game, this time pumping millions into reaching millennial voters. Plus, a June ballot measure that would tax all Bay Area property owners to help protect coastal regions from rising sea levels. And a preview of the long-anticipated newly expanded SFMOMA, set for its grand opening this weekend. But first, the continuing coverage on the controversy surrounding the San Francisco Police Department. This week, several San Francisco supervisors joined community groups in demanding Chief Greg Suhr's removal. This comes after months of intense protests over several officer-involved shootings and a series of racist and homophobic texts by officers. Joining us now with an update is San Francisco Chronicle reporter Vivian Ho. Vivian, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So the call for Chief Suhr's removal is an about-face for some of the supervisors. Why is this happening now?
It's really been a long time coming with all the protesting after the Mario Woods shooting in December. And at this point, you know, we've had another racist text message scandal come out. We had another police officer-involved shooting of a man of color in the Mission District. And on top of all of that, the Blue Ribbon Panel has released a preliminary report, which found a lot of issues with the police department.
What were some of the key issues they found?
The key issues they found, and please keep in mind these are preliminary findings right now, so they did not provide the evidence that they had to go with it. But the preliminary findings really echoed some of the concerns that people have made about the police department for decades now. They found that the police department lacked transparency and accountability in a lot of these areas. They were not taking down data or analyzing the data in a way that would help people understand what was happening in communities of color and when they were policing communities of color. And on top of that, there were issues with hiring practices and promotions and how the union interacts with the police department itself.
And we should point out that the police officers union did issue a response to that report saying that the findings were biased, one-sided, and illegitimate. At this point, how likely is it that Mayor Lee or the police commission will actually fire Chief Suhr?
I think at this point, only time will tell. Police Chief Greg Suhr has said multiple times that he is committed to staying with the department. He's committed to seeing the reforms go through and that he himself is not stepping down. The mayor and several police commissioners have stood by him for quite some time, and I believe they will continue to do so.
Suhr supporters, including Mayor Lee and also a couple of supervisors, Mark Farrell and Scott Wiener, say he is one of the most progressive police chiefs in the country. If he were to no longer be in that post, what impact would that have on the pace of reforms that are already underway at the department?
There are a lot of reforms going on right now. The police commission is just going through the use of force policy line by line at this point. They've been going since the December 2nd shooting of Mario Woods. At this point, though, you know, it's the police chief is as he's under a lot of scrutiny, but he says he's very committed to making sure these reforms happen. But protesters are saying, you know, him staying on as the head of the department after all these years, after everything that has happened, is a bad symbolic move. Symbolically, they're saying that he needs to leave in order for these reforms to take place.
So the hunger strike has ended. Are there more protests planned?
The hunger strikers, you know, for the five of them are all very tied into the community. They have indicated that they will continue to put pressure on the department and on the city and on Mayor Ed Lee to fulfill their call for Chief Suhr to step down.
The final findings of that Blue Ribbon Commission comes out in a couple of weeks?
A couple of weeks, yeah. And the thing with this report is that it is echoing concerns that have been with the department for decades at this point.
All right, so much more to come. Vivian Ho, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
If you think there's no solution to the climate crisis, think again.
The New York Times has called him the most influential environmentalist in American politics. Tom Steyer, a billionaire and former hedge fund manager, is pushing for more political action on climate change. His latest effort is a $25 million campaign to get more millennial voters registered to vote and hopefully to back his climate change agenda at the polls. Tom Steyer joins us now to talk about that, as well as his new partnership with labor unions targeting the presidential race. Tom Steyer, nice to have you here.
Thuy, it's great to be here.
Well, I want to ask you about your millennial vote campaign. Your nonprofit group, Next Gen Climate, is working on getting out the vote among young people in 7 key battleground states. How do you plan to do that, and why is this so important to you?
Well, millennials are going to be the biggest age cohort in the 2016 election, more than the baby boomers. And it's really important for our democracy that they be educated about the issues, that they understand how important this election is, and that they participate at the polls. So we want to be, we want to do as much as we can to make that education happen, to have the voter-to-voter contact that we think is at the heart of democracy, and to make sure that we have the broadest possible democracy in November.
But time and time again, election data has shown that millennials do not vote. So is this the best way to spend $25 million?
What the data has shown is that they haven't voted in the past. What it also shows is that they're very aware of the issues, that they're politically involved. You can look at Black Lives Matter, you can look at the Dreamers, you can look at the Fossil Fuel Divestment Act and know that the millennials actually are very knowledgeable and interested in politics.
But how will you take that and
bought
translate
into
it?
Electoral politics.
Right. So how are you going to take that and translate it to them actually showing up at the polls?
What we're trying to do is talk to them about issues. We're trying to make sure they understand what's at stake, what the different candidates represent, so that they know what a stark choice there's likely to be in November, so that they know that their vote is really important. That's really our goal, is to engage them the way that Americans have been engaged in politics for over 200 years.
And this week you announced a new partnership with major public employee unions to oppose Donald Trump. How do you plan to do that?
Well, once again, that is another effort with traditional allies of ours to go to do field work, the kind of door-to-door voter education for working families, to make sure they understand where the candidates stand on progressive issues, to make sure they understand what's at stake, the kind of positions that Mr. Trump has taken, where he stands relative to the people who are likely to be running against him as Democrats, so that voters can understand how important this is and how important their vote is.
And some people might also look at this and say that a collaboration with labor unions may be a sign that you're building a broader support network here for a future run for governor.
Well, we have worked with the unions for years. I mean, if you ever do field work, if you ever go door to door in any state, the fact of the matter is the best partners we've had traditionally are always organized labor.
Still thinking of running for governor and having them as your partners in a future run?
What we have said, or what I've said, is I am determined to stand up for the values I care about the most, including climate, including equality, including justice. And I have no idea after November 8th where we're going to stand as a nation, where we're going to stand as a state. So I'll make the decision then. But what I do know is whatever I do will be consistent with what I'm doing now and is going to push for the exact same values that I push for consistently.
Okay, speaking of climate change, we asked our audience on social media what they would like to ask you about. And Ken Miller tweeted this: why has he made climate change his nameplate issue? It doesn't motivate most voters.
So I have 2 answers to that. The reason that I've pushed so hard is I think this is our generational challenge, that if we don't get this right, that all the other things that we care about that are absolutely urgent and absolutely important, the kind of justice issues, economic justice, getting people fair jobs, fair education, fair housing, those are things that will suffer dramatically if we don't get climate right. Climate is the overriding issue that we have to make sure we get right so we can get everything else right. In terms of whether it motivates people, I would disagree with your correspondent. What I would say is this.
No, it's a person on Twitter who tweeted that.
And
yeah.
I would say this. It depends how you describe what you're doing. If what you say is, we're interested in clean air for your children, people care about that. There are 3.3 million Californians with asthma. If you say you care about clean, available drinking water for people, people care about that. Take a look at Flint, Michigan, and plus a lot of places in California. If you say you're worried about having enough water for people to live safely and for our agriculture to work, Think about the drought in California. People care about that. And if you say the best chance we have to grow our economy and create good paying jobs for working families, that they can raise a family on in dignity, is clean energy, people care about that. So it really depends what you talk about. If you talk about the local human effects of not getting this right, people absolutely understand that in their bones, and it is a top issue. If you talk about it theoretically from a science standpoint, he's right, it's not a top issue.
And you know, you're obviously very passionate about this, but there are also critics out there who say the company you founded, Farallon Capital Management, when you were there, invested in companies that generated fossil fuels and carbon pollution, and they see hypocrisy here, that you're now railing against the very companies and industries that you made money off of.
Well, I'd say this. When I was at Farallon, we invested in every industry in the book, including fossil fuels. And what happened was, I read a lot of literature and decided that those were bad decisions, and I decided to do something about it. If getting new information and acting on it is hypocrisy, then I think that's foolishness. What we're asking people to do is exactly what I did a decade ago, which is to look at the information and decide we need to make a change. And I actually think we encourage people, every single person in the United States has participated in the fossil fuel economy. And every single person in the United States, including the chairman of Exxon, needs to make a decision that it's time to make a change. And that's exactly what I did 10 years ago.
Okay. Tom Steyer, a pleasure to have you on. Thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
Turning now to an environmental issue on the June ballot, rising sea levels brought about by climate change. The Pacific Ocean and San Francisco Bay are expected to rise up to 2 feet by 2050, according to a study by the National Academy of Sciences. Other studies indicate flooding would devastate local airports, highways, and buildings. Measure AA tries to address that with a $12 annual parcel tax to raise money for flood protection. It goes before voters in all 9 Bay Area counties. Joining me now to discuss the measure are David Lewis, Executive Director of Save the Bay, and Linda Koelling, former mayor of Foster City. Welcome to you both.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So, David, help us understand, how much are sea levels expected to rise over the next 2 decades, and what are the projected consequences?
Well, we don't know the rate of sea level rise over the next couple of decades. You mentioned the projection, that's an official projection, and state guidance. The important thing is we actually have some time to prepare, and restoring wetlands around the shoreline is one of the best ways that we can prepare to protect the shoreline and communities here in the Bay Area from sea level rise and from more frequent flooding from heavy storms. And that's what's expected to change over the next few years. Tidal marshes around the edge of the bay used to be much greater in number before the gold rush. We've destroyed a lot of those tidal marshes from developing the shoreline, and we have an amazing opportunity to restore them. If Measure AA passes, we can raise the money to do that more quickly.
And tidal marshes prevent storm surges? Is that the buffer that they provide?
Yeah, marshes act like a sponge. When there's a high tide or extreme storm, they can soak up water and then release it slowly. If you have a shoreline without tidal marsh in front of it, you either need to build a higher seawall or some other form of protection. So marshes actually provide a lot of benefits at the same time that they protect the shoreline. They really help make the bay healthier and cleaner and provide habitat for fish and wildlife.
Linda Koelling, how concerned are you about climate change and rising sea levels?
Well, I think anything that affects our way of life is of a concern. Now, I live in Foster City, and of course that's below sea level by about 5 feet. And we have taken measures to increase the levy system. In 1989, we increased it after the earthquake. I think it's a significant concern over time, over the next 100 years, but that's not why I'm here to discuss this measure. It's not about the science of sea level rise. My concern is the over-governing of what's going on in the Bay Area. I'm concerned that there's going to be redundancy in government. I'm concerned about the ambitious plans by overreaching regional authorities, continuing significantly reducing local control. And I am an advocate about local control.
David, can you respond to that?
Well, Measure AA is a very small tax shared by the residents of the region that produces a huge benefit. We have an incredible opportunity to restore tidal marsh around the bay because we have areas that were diked off for salt ponds and hay fields over a century ago that have not yet been paved over. Unlike Foster City, which used to be tidal marsh and now it's a thriving community, but the opportunity to restore that tidal marsh is going to provide a lot of benefits for the bay, and the missing ingredient is money. So Measure AA doesn't create any new bureaucracy, it doesn't create any new regulations to oversee the quality of the bay. It just creates a source of grant money so that these areas already protected for tidal marsh restoration can be turned from brown or crusty salt ponds into vibrant tidal marsh that provides the benefits we mentioned against sea level rise, also benefits for fish and wildlife. It actually sequesters carbon from the atmosphere in the fight against climate change, and it provides an amazing open space resource in this heavily urbanized area.
But I think Linda's point, though, is that there are lots of agencies out there already charged with doing this, and shouldn't they do a better job of getting it done under the structure we already have? Linda, am I right?
Yeah, and that's my question. The silly question is, how many environmental agencies does it take to do the same job? We've had environmental, all you have to do is go online and take a look at the different agencies that are charged to protect the bay, or volunteer agencies that go around and clean up the bay and so on and so forth. So I guess my concern is that the Bay Area doesn't need another layer of governance to do this particular job.
And the interesting thing about that is that this measure has been endorsed by more elected officials and more governments who see the need for an additional grant source. None of those agencies that exist now have as part of their mission asking voters to share a part of this cost and administering grants to restore tidal marsh. The whole reason for this is that it doesn't already exist as a mission. And in fact, we have more than 1,000 local individuals and organizations, everybody from Governor Brown and Senator Feinstein down to every member of the San Mateo County Board of Supervisors, where Linda lives, and 40 mayors, environmental groups, business groups, organized labor. There's never been an effort and never been an opportunity for everyone in the Bay Area together to vote for San Francisco Bay. This is the first time ever, and we hope people will do it.
And speaking of sharing taxes, a point that you made earlier, David, the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association says it's really unfair that big wealthy companies like Apple and Facebook, for example, only have to pay $12 a year, the same amount that an individual homeowner would pay. They chose to build in harm's way. Should they not have to shoulder more of the financial burden?
The primary purpose of this measure is not to protect property. That's an extra benefit that we get in some places from restoring tidal marsh. We all share San Francisco Bay. It's the heart of our region. It's the reason people move here and live here. Its beauty is part of what attracts businesses to locate here and people to live here.
Linda?
So we're all going to share from the benefits of this small tax, and that's why it's proposed to be an equal, tiny amount for everyone who has a parcel in the Bay Area.
Linda, do you think big companies should have to pay more?
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, I want to stop this and say that opposition to Measure AA is not anti-environmental concerns. I want to make that really clear. It's all about anti-unnecessary government using increased tax dollars and using a broad brush of authority with no accountability to the public. Oh. This authority, I mean, $12 sounds real menial right now, but this authority is going to be able to raise taxes further and garner more money for future projects if necessary.
This authority cannot raise any tax without the approval of 2/3 of the voters, and $12 is a tiny tax. And in fact, the only opposition that's registered in any county in the voter pamphlet is anti-taxpayer groups who oppose any tax, no matter how small and no matter the purpose. We hope voters will look at the actual purpose and the broad support for this measure and agree it's a tiny tax to pay for a huge benefit.
We will have to leave the discussion there. Thank you both, David Lewis with Save the Bay and Linda Koelling, former mayor of Foster City.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
This weekend marks the long-awaited reopening of the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. The 3-year, $305 million redesign more than doubles the museum's previous exhibition space, and it's being praised by many as an international destination for modern and contemporary art. The expanded site showcases the SFMOMA's growing collection, including an impressive body of artwork from the vast private collection of Gap clothing founders Doris and Donald Fisher. We are joined now by their son, Bob Fisher, who grew up with the art, and by the director of SFMOMA, Neil Benesra. Welcome to you both.
Thank you. Thanks.
So, Bob, you must have done many walkthroughs of the new museum by now. What is your favorite part of the museum?
Well, I think the Ellsworth Kelly galleries are just incredible. There are 4 galleries that cover the realm of his painting. The first gallery, which is color field paintings, is absolutely gorgeous and meticulously set up, and I love those galleries.
What about the sequence sculpture?
Well, sequence was a particular favorite of my father's, and in fact, my brothers and I refer to it often as our 4th brother.
Because he loved it that much.
He loved it that much, and it's situated at obviously at the Howard Street entrance of the museum, and just looks fantastic. Very powerful and perfect, in my opinion.
And Neil, I know this is like asking you, which ones out of your kids are your favorite, right? But what are your favorite works?
Well, I love the Gerhard Richter Gallery on the 6th floor, one of the great living artists, probably the greatest living European artists. But I also love the public spaces of the museum. The art is fantastic, but it's really meaningful for me to see all the people coming to the museum.
And how does this expansion change MoMA's status in the art world, do you think?
I think we've taken a quantum leap forward. We were certainly one of the outstanding museums of modern and contemporary art in the world, and I think now we really rise to the top echelon.
And you're making it much more accessible to the public as well, right? You have a free public gallery on the ground floor.
The first floor galleries are all free of charge, and then we've made the museum free of charge for anyone 18 and under, which we're really, really pleased about.
Wonderful. And Bob, you visited, you left home, but you also came back to visit your parents many times over the years. This art was hanging in their home. You're walking by it first thing in the morning, cup of coffee in your hand, maybe. What was that like to have all these masterpieces around you?
Well, you sort of grow accustomed to the artwork, and believe it or not, after a while you barely notice them, but once in a while you'd sit down at a meal and look over, and there'd be a de Kooning painting or a Philip Guston painting, and you just take a moment and look at them, and it was an amazing thing to grow up around.
And were they viewed as precious objects to kind of keep at a distance, or was it just like a mirror hanging in the home?
Well, funny enough, it was more like a mirror or a couch. It wasn't decorative, but it was something beautiful to look at and to spend time with.
And when did your parents start collecting, and what was the philosophy that guided them?
They started collecting really in the late 70s. We had a lot of wall space in the Gap offices, and they began collecting prints. They wanted to really bring creativity and innovation into the offices, and so they would buy prints. That turned out later to start collecting oil paintings and sculptures, and their philosophy really was just to buy things that they both loved.
Did they have an art advisor?
No, they never had any advisors. They did it themselves. My mother always said that why give up the thing that was the most fun to somebody else?
And now many of those works, of course, are in MoMA. But Neil, were there certain challenges in translating a work from the home to a museum space?
Well, the major thing for us was to make sure that we design galleries for these pictures and for our collection as well that would really be appropriate. Get the right scale, the right quality of light, the right level of detail, make sure that we were creating a setting for this great art that would show them to their best advantage.
So what is the big difference between the home and sort of the museum stage, if you will? And are there ever instances where a piece that looks great in the home does not look so great in a gallery space?
I think it can be said in any case when a work of art leaves anyone's home and comes into a museum, it's a little bit more of a challenge. It's one thing to hang in a living room, but when you have to go toe-to-toe with Picassos and Matisses and Rothkos and Rauschenbergs, you have to raise your game if you're a painting. And what I'm thrilled about is the works that have come from the Fisher collection have really been, they sing beautifully in our galleries.
How exhaustive and exhausting was this process for you? I had read that you actually made miniature models of thousands of works and just kind of had them arranged just so to make sure everything looks good on a model scale.
We designed the entire 7-floor gallery, 130,000 square feet of gallery space. Every work of art had its place, was planned very, very carefully.
And how'd you get the big pieces into place?
Well, the actual works.
Yeah, the actual works.
Well, in some cases we had to use cranes to reach the galleries. In other cases, it was very easy to move them through. But the paintings come in very big boxes sometimes, big crates, to keep them safe. And so we work very, very hard to make the galleries look very, very beautiful and easy.
Art museums are designed with large elevators,
Yeah.
and we try to hide them. But if you look carefully, you'll see them.
And I have to ask you this, first of all, Bob, and Neil, you can chime in as well. You know, we are living in changing times in the Bay Area. We have increasing income disparities. We have tent cities, economic struggling middle class. Some may view this big, shiny museum as really a rich person's institution. How can MoMA and others involved in the visual arts scene counter that view, Bob?
Well, Neil spoke a little bit earlier about all children under 18 are admitted free of charge. We have great public spaces. There certainly is income disparity in San Francisco, and that's something that we all care deeply about. But there's at the same time, there's a role for major cultural institutions, and we think that we have one of the great ones in the city.
We have a very important sculpture that's just entered the collection by a Los Angeles artist named Charles Ray. And it's a sculpture, solid steel sculpture, and it's a homeless woman reclining on a bench, and it speaks volumes about the current moment we're living in. It's a great work of art and also a great kind of social expression as well.
Thank you so much, Bob Fisher and Neil Benesra.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Thuy Vu. Thanks so much for watching. For all of KQED's news coverage, please go to kqednews.org.